Why, hello, and welcome to a slightly different episode of Contest of Challengers. This is Patrick, and if you are listening to this when it goes up on either the Patreon feed or the actual release on your favorite podcast listening platform, I am not even in the country. I am out celebrating the wedding of Challengers reservist Fallon Mackerline and his wonderful bride, Pamela. And as such, I was unavailable to record this episode, but knowing in advance that I would be not even in Chicago, not even in Illinois, not even in the United States, I reached out to two people who are avid listeners of this very podcast, avid supporters of Challengers, two people who give me some of the most feedback that we get from this podcast, and I thought, why not have them step in and ruin their own listening schedules, because now they won't have an episode to listen to because they're on it. And rather than have me introduce them, that's what they do after the main title. So I will leave them to it. But also, because it is a different episode, we're going to go back to an older theme as well, just to really signify that this is not the standard Patrick and Dal podcastatorium episode. In fact, it is not even the podcastatorium. Apparently, it was recorded, though, in a podcastatorium, so there is still some synergy throughout. And we're keeping it in the Midwest for this episode. I definitely didn't want to leave you without anything while I abandoned this entire country. I wanted to make sure you still got something to listen to. You still got something comics industry related, even comics business related. But this way, I get to experience it just like you do.
From Challengers Comics and Conversation in Chicago, this is Contest of Challengers.
Hi, Dal.
Hi, Patrick.
This is not actually Dal and Patrick. This is Heidi and Josh coming to you from the Podcastatorium Annex. Several weeks out of when you'll actually be hearing this. But Patrick asked us to step in on this podcast, and we're both big fans. So we said we would.
We didn't tell them what the podcast was.
Oh, what is this podcast?
It's Contest of Challengers, a comics business podcast.
Is it a comics business... Comics industry business comic contest?
You're throwing... No, there's too many words now. I didn't have enough and you used too many.
A comics industry business podcast.
Yes.
That's what we're doing here today. So when Dal can't make the podcast, he gets amazing guests to step in. Obviously, when Patrick can't make the podcast, we can't really expect the same of Dal. But we're both big listeners. I listen to the podcast almost always every Sunday morning. I go for a walk and listen to the podcast. I nag Patrick on Saturday nights if it hasn't shown up in my email box, because I'm also a Patreon of the podcast. You listen to the podcast at work on Mondays.
I do, when I'm processing all of the new stuff we get from Diamond every week.
Right. So you work at Westfield Comics in Madison, Wisconsin. And I shop there. So I am not a retailer, although I have volunteered to work Free Comic Book Day and inventory at Westfield. So I'm kind of honorary Westfield.
Yeah.
We became friends because of the comic shop. I was a huge fan of Amethyst, Princess of the Gemworld, as a child. And then I fell away from comics in my adulthood. But when DC relaunched them with the New 52, there was a new Amethyst book, so I found a shop close to me, which was Josh's shop, and started buying Amethyst, which crossed over into Justice League Dark. Started buying that, started buying Wonder Woman, started buying all the comics. And then once I started coming in more, we kind of quickly became comics besties. And that was about 10 years ago. So that's how I came to comics. How did you come to comics, Josh?
So when I was really, really little, Masters of the Universe toys came with mini comics. So those were my very first mini comics. That would have been early mid-'80s. At some point, I had a subscription to Electric Company magazine, which had Spidey Super Stories.
Nice.
Is that what it was called?
I didn't get that magazine.
Someone is welcome to correct us on whatever platform you're listening to this on, where you actually get to reply to things like that. I didn't start getting like regular format comics off the shelf until 1990. I got an issue of, I believe issue 10 off the top of my head, of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Adventures. And shortly thereafter, I started picking comics off the spinner rack at our local grocery store when there were still like neighborhood grocery stores that were tiny, non-giant corporate-owned entities.
I used to buy Amethyst from the grocery store.
So Captain America 372, the first part of Streets of Poison, was the quick downfall of, I guess, me having a job that paid better. Because very shortly thereafter, I was drawn into Uncanny X-Men. My first issue was Jim Lee's first as regular penciler, 268, because it had Captain America. Fast forward to about 10 years later. There was years of me buying, some not buying as much. And I think it was actually Powerpuff Girls that got me back buying somewhat regularly again, dipping my toes in. And then after about a year, so in 2001, I was working at Westfield part-time. 2006, I went full-time when I became assistant manager. 2010, I started managing our second location on the east side of Madison, which lasted for about 9.5 years until just before pandemic, where we closed a couple days earlier than we were planning to.
Right.
Because our lease was not getting renewed because the landlords bought the building and were expanding. And we didn't find anything soon enough. So now I work back at our only location as one of two managers.
Nice. Yeah, so the Westfield East location is where I found you, where the first and last comic I bought there was actually Amethyst, because the Amy Reader's DC Young, the young adult sort of series they did. Stephanie Hans did a alt cover for that was super gorgeous, so that was a great store. That was my, just comic haven for a good chunk of those 9 years. Maybe 7 or 8. But
also during my pseudo hiatus, buying less before I worked at Westfield, I may or may not have met Tim Seeley at UW Eau Claire in a 300-person lecture hall in Intro to Mass Media way back in the fall of 1997. So
nice. Tim Seeley, big friend of Challengers comics. Tell us how you found Challengers.
I don't recall for sure. I believe I found Challengers because I became friends with Jimmy Hayes on Twitter way back in the olden days of Twitter when it was...
Yeah, we will dead name Twitter on this podcast.
Yeah. I'll stop dead naming Twitter when everything else stops getting dead named.
There you go.
So that was pretty much my introduction to Challengers. What was your introduction to Challengers?
So mine is super nerdy. I was going to be in Chicago for Free Comic Book Days. I wasn't going to be able to stop at Westfield. This is before we were pretty tight and before I was volunteering. And I think I was in the store and I was mentioning I wasn't going to be at Free Comic Books Day, and you recommended Challengers to me. And then I looked and saw that Brian Azzarello was going to be there and was a huge fan of his Wonder Woman run. So I went into Challengers and I got my Future's End. What was the...
Yeah, I think it was Future's End.
Yeah, Future's End, signed by Brian. I was too nervous to even say anything. I think I just put the comic down. He signed it. I picked it up and walked away. But I was very excited. It was also my first comic signing.
And he didn't know you liked wrestling yet, so you guys didn't have a bunch to talk about it.
Exactly. And I did buy something because even though I was newly back into comics, I knew that Free Comic Book Day books were not free. So I did buy something. Dal rang me up. And I remembered all of that. And I had a great time. I had a super great time. I had a great day in Chicago, and then I had a great time visiting Challengers. And then after we became friends, we started going down to Chicago a lot for comic stuff and for wrestling. Like Patrick and Dal were both pretty big into wrestling. I think the first year that we were friends, we went to Chicago, and I think probably went to Challengers every single time, 13 times.
Was it 13 times the first year?
I think it was like 13 times the first year, because there was 1 month we went twice.
I don't think it was a calendar year, though.
That's correct. Not a calendar year, but like a 12 adjacent months.
There was a Pomplamoose show in there.
Pomplamoose, Daniel ate the sandwich. I think we went to a Toy de Jour event.
That sounds very possible.
Yeah, we went to
if not, we went to Toy de Jour a bunch.
Yeah, and we went to a few Challengers events.
Also, R.I.P. Paladar.
R.I.P. Paladar. That was our thing. We'd go to Challengers. We'd go to Toy de Jour. We'd go get mojitos. Go to the pinball bar. That was our thing. And I always enjoyed going down to Challengers and like finding new stuff. Like, I had a pretty, hefty pull list at Westfield, but I always wanted to like find something. So it was like almost like, oh, I'm not pulling this, so I can try it here. It's always finding my novel stuff at Challengers. And, we love Patrick and Dal. We love Challengers. We've been down to a bunch of events, bunch of signings, the Doctor Who Christmas art show,
yep.
The 15th anniversary party. It's just a big...
I think that's more of a birthday party.
It was. We went down for my birthday for my birthday this year, what I wanted to do was go down to Challengers. We also went to Marge's Candies, which we'd never done before, but... Yeah, I don't know, I guess, what that says about me or what it says about Challengers, that what you want to do for your birthday is drive 2+ hours to go to a comic shop.
I think it's a reasonable thing.
I think if it's Challengers, it's a reasonable thing. So yeah, that is how we became friends, how we got into comics, and how we got connected with Challengers. We've also been to wrestling shows with them.
Yep.
So we do share that. So we're really not that weird of guest hosts this week. Let's talk about Westfield. What's going on at Westfield these days, and what are folks at Westfield liking to read?
I don't pay attention to what everyone else likes to read, to be perfectly honest. I know that Jeff likes Aquaman. You
pay attention to what I read. Like, I get some pretty great comics concierge service from Josh. None of you should expect this from your retailer, but I don't really have to shop for my comics because Josh sort of knows what I like and will text me and say, hey, do you want this Phil Hester book? Or I'm putting you down for Stephanie Hahn's covers, and the answer is just always yes.
Otherwise, though, more general sales-wise, like Challengers and nearly everyone else, stuff is down this year. I tend to look less at single-issue comic stuff and look at graphic novel sales quite a bit, since I usually am the one doing the restocks on those every week. But I did recently run a fancy report to look at just what our overall best sellers were for this year so far. Marvel has made a bit of a comeback after a very, very lackluster year last year, where I think their highest selling book in our top 50 was around 35, and that was one of the Spider-Punk trades.
Oh.
Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, though, has helped a bit this year. But our top-selling graphic novels, similar to last year, tend to be the Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips graphic novels. Though some other noteworthy things in the top 10 this year are Local Man Volume 1 from Tim Seeley and Tony Fleece, and Transformers Volume 1 from Daniel Warren Johnson.
Nice.
But basically, our top 10 graphic novels mostly just look like here's a bunch of best-selling Image Comics graphic novels.
Sure. Saga.
Yeah, I think there's a Saga one in there because there was a new Saga volume this year.
How is the Absolute Batman doing for you?
Very well. Better than regular Batman.
I finally just read it last night for the first time, so...
I have not read it because when I flipped through it, nothing about it looked visually like this is a Batman story I need to read right away.
Right. It is very, for me it was a little bit disconcerting, but I did ultimately like it. And it gave me something to talk about with my nephew who's a huge Batman mark.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you something about Westfield, but now I can't think of what it is. Oh, it wasn't about Westfield. It was going to be about Daniel Warren Johnson and Do a Powerbomb, which is a series I super enjoyed. And I do believe Challenger still has their bespoke cover where you can get Patrick and Dal in the audience watching a wrestling match. That is a great series that I would highly recommend. Did you also do a powerbomb?
Yes.
Nice.
It sold pretty well.
Good.
I have not finished it yet after cramming it, a bunch of it in one night.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I read, even though I picked it up in single issues, I think I read it all in one or two sittings, and really, really liked that book. What else, how do you do things at Westfield that are, like, you don't have the same point of sale as Challengers? Anything else you can think of that's different or noteworthy from Challengers?
We do not use as many distributors as Challengers. Generally, our top three are Diamond, Lunar, and Penguin. There are times when I definitely wish we had Simon & Schuster and Ingram. Mm-hmm. We have had Ingram in the past. I would say another big difference is that at Westfield there are two managers that work a large majority of the time as opposed to two owners.
Right.
Which makes a very big difference. I don't have specific numbers, but there are a lot of titles where it seems like we sell similar quantities of them for single issues. We may have a little more floor space.
Yeah, that tracks.
But it's configured differently, and we're not in Chicago. We're in Madison.
Yeah. Do you think looking at like what, Challengers has on the shelf and, what they push on the podcast, and I'm going to ask for both Westfield stores that you've managed, East and West, do you think the audiences are the same? Like in my head, and I have no logical reason I can think to say this, but I feel like maybe the East Side Madison clientele was more like the Challengers clientele than West Side.
Yes. But East Side was different from West Side because there were books at one point where they were selling better at East than West, despite being a third the size and doing a third the sales.
Sure.
And it wasn't just like rando little indie book. It was like major Marvel character book. Overall, though, I don't know that they're super different because just the clientele itself can be so varied within what everyone's buying.
Eastside Madison definitely felt like a good place to shop as a woman. I think things have probably gotten better, but especially when I first started reading comics, it wasn't always the best scene to be the one woman walking into a comic shop and either being, challenged on your fandom or ignored or whatever. Eastside was definitely very women friendly, in my opinion. So how do you do your pro bags?
The divider goes behind. And I had a thought about this after hearing what Dal and Patrick were talking about a couple weeks ago. And the first time this came up, I actually think I did text Patrick and tell him that we did it behind. And admittedly...
So the divider goes behind. So the name is there and the comics are in front of the divider.
Yes. But that has been the Westfield way before I even started working there. But I realized that in some ways, what that reminds me of is a file folder. I don't ever recall people putting information on the front of a file folder and then having all of the paperwork in it be behind that tab. I always recall the tab being in back.
Yep.
And then the contents in the folder are in front of it. And that probably goes back to helping my mom at work for the state of Wisconsin many, many moons ago before I even started buying comics.
Yeah. So in your mind it makes sense and you wouldn't change it?
Correct.
Nice. So I think Westfield has a very generous pull policy. And I will say, like, when I first started shopping at the store, I was pretty much coming in every week and just buying off the shelf. I was buying one Morning Glories that somebody else had previously subscribed for and stopped subscribing for. And I think you just didn't cut the orders anymore. You just put it on the shelf, and I would end up buying that one. And then, like, 1 week somebody else bought it, and I was like, I just gotta start a poll. But I felt shy about asking about if I could pull or if I was getting enough books or what the situation was. But so Westfield, you don't have any minimum. You can pull one book if you want. In there, what are the guidelines for pickup? Are there any?
I had guidelines for it.
What were they? Was it once a month, once 2 months? It seems generous, I recall.
It might have been every 2 months. Might have been one. But generally, it was also one of those where I told people, I'm not a babysitter.
Right.
And after a couple issues with a couple customers, it got to the point where I made sure to tell people, we may let you know, but I may not. I don't get paid to be a babysitter. And I would be a little more cutthroat with it, which is sort of the upside of being a manager instead of an owner. But I know that the owner would have had my back if someone complained about me being that cutthroat about cutting someone off from their polls.
Right. Well, it's just like what Dal has said a couple of times where, you know, what polls are, will you buy this for me and I'll pay you back?
Yeah.
Sorry, what else were you going to say about polls?
I do not remember.
I'm sorry, because I interrupted and talked about Dal. Dal ruins everything. Just kidding, Dal. Yeah, I mean, I was picking up every week, but, so now that you're at the West Side store, how is that going? Like, do you have a lot of people that are delinquent on their polls, and how do you handle that?
I am not going to answer that.
Okay, that's fair. If you are a Westfield shopper, go pick up your polls. If you're an anybody shopper, go pick up your polls. Like, yeah, you don't want to have somebody else buying something for you and owe them. How big is your pull list? Do you get stuff pulled still? Are you still getting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pulled?
No, I stopped that around issue 80 of the previous series.
Okay.
What is on my pull list? I don't remember. A lot of times I'll just special order here and there, especially when there's this many covers to choose from.
Yeah.
And then I just stop buying after like 5 issues and go, what's the point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is your to-read pile out of control?
Yes.
My to-read pile is ridiculous. Sometimes people ask me, like, what I'm reading for comics, and I'm like, well, I can tell you what I'm reading, but let me just tell you all the things I'm buying and not reading. I think I currently have 2 short boxes by my bed of, like, comics that are in my to-read pile that I intend to read, and then periodically I'll go through it and just, you know, admit to myself, like, I'm not reading this anytime soon, and I'll file it. But I buy way more comics than I read, and that problem seems to be getting worse and worse every year. And I don't know if that's just because I'm reading less and less, or what.
I stopped having a separate this is my to read pile because it was just too much.
Yeah, mine is a
So
little...
at this point it's probably, I'll say, a quarter to a third of what I own is my to read pile.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which is many, many short boxes.
Yeah. It's just good sometimes, I think, to be honest with yourself and get it out of the pile. I finally read FML, this week, even though it came out the day after the election, which is when I think probably a lot of people needed to comfort read it. I just was not ready. I just wasn't really, I think I was just maybe not ready to engage with anything I thought I would enjoy or be happy about. But so yeah, like that's at 2 weeks or something like that. Whereas like Bitch Planet came out, I came home and read it immediately and then read it again immediately. Yeah, there's not a lot of stuff I think that I'm reading as soon as it walks in the door anymore. But it's good to have all the comics at your fingertips just in case you want to read them.
Yes.
So Bitch Planet is one of my huge favorite comics. Particularly the first issue, blew me away. When I was getting Bitch Planet pulled, when Bitch Planet was coming out, I would routinely get 2 copies pulled, so I'd always have an extra to give away. It was one of the things I always bought in every comic shop I went into. I tried to buy Bitch Planet just to support Bitch Planet in stores, and because I would just make sets of them to give away to people, please read this comic. So I was a big Bitch Planet evangelist. And there was a whole bunch of other comics that I loved too that I think we can get into. But what are some of your favorites, Josh?
Mark Gruenwald's Captain America, Usagi Yojimbo. My favorite of the last decade and a couple years is Sex Criminals.
Same.
My short list, generally my short list of to read to sort of tie into that is basically Matt Fraction, Kelly Sue, Chip Zdarsky. That's sort of my short list of stuff I want to read sooner than later. In addition to things off the top of my head that I know I bought recently. Transformers Volume 1, Local Man Volume 1. Witchblade is probably in there.
Oh, yeah.
I should probably also mention Masters of the Universe mini comics. That was actually a book that I missed out on being a part of for reasons and didn't realize I was missing out on it, but had I known, I maybe would have reshuffled those reasons.
Challengers had an event for that, didn't they?
Yes.
We went to that, yeah.
Yes.
In conjunction with Toy de Jour, right?
Yes. And somewhere else. Whoever had the fan movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I have 2 copies of that mini comic collection plus a ginormous stack of those mini comics.
Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're big House Diffraction fans, I think.
Someday Matt Fraction needs to do a Snake Guy comic about Snake Eyes.
That would be fun.
Robert Kirkman needs to get on that.
That would be fun. Yeah, so Bitch Planet was huge for me. I do stay fairly current with Saga. I love Saga. I love Catherine Emanen, whose name I learned to pronounce correctly from this podcast. Her Hellcat is my favorite Hellcat. Her Sif is my favorite Sif. She can do no wrong. I didn't read the X-Men that everybody hated her for, but I'm telling you right now, she can do no wrong. Chip, we love Chip. Chip is probably the only person who we will wait in line for at a comic convention.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anything Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans do together, I love Stephanie's art so much. Huge Loki fan. I was going to try to read the Giants book before this podcast, but didn't. But they're great. What am I forgetting for favorites that we want to... Looking over in the podcastatorium at the bookshelves. Let's see. To try to keep it like a Challengers podcast, we did read a couple previews. So we read The Seasons by Rick Remender and Paul, say his last name for me.
Azacada?
Yeah, maybe. So this is a story about 4 sisters who are named after the seasons. It's a detective story. It's apparently a horror story or horror adjacent.
Yeah. So when I was trying to think of who would I recommend this book to based on like the vibe I got from it, aside from horror and clowns, what it really reminded me of was Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah, I can totally see that. I think the art is amazing. I would probably buy this book partly for the art.
Also, it's not going to be for kids the way Doctor Who would be for kids.
Right.
But you can't necessarily tell that from the first issue. Which might be a good thing that the solicitation copy feels so different from what actually happens, because it kind of tells you what the series will be about, but then the issue itself didn't feel that way at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked it. I liked the different, there's kind of some different moods when it's flashbacking, and the colors. The colors are great.
Who did the colors? Was that Paul too? The credits are about 4 or 5 pages in. Matthew Lopez?
Yeah.
With Russ Wooten letters. Oh yeah, Russ.
Yeah. I actually did note that I really liked the lettering as well. Which we should talk about in a second, but
it is also a double-size issue, but isn't just 2 regular-size issues put together. I feel like it did a better job of what a double-size issue does, which is allow for more visual storytelling without lots of words necessarily.
Yes. It's sparse on words, big on travel and adventure.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I don't know.
I keep cutting you off. I'm sorry about that. So this FOC's 12/9, which will be after this podcast comes out. So if you want to put this on your pull list, you can.
Well, I mean, assuming they don't listen to this after that.
Oh, that's fair.
But they've got about a week.
Right.
Tangentially related. Like 11 years ago, this very weekend was the very first time Kamen Rider Baron used Mango Arms.
Nice.
Or the Mango Lockseed to
Wait,
get the
this
Mango
weekend
Arms
or December?
This weekend.
Okay.
This weekend.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Del, for that important Kamen Rider plug. I want to say Kamen Driver. Yeah, so I thought it was gorgeous. I haven't read a ton of Rick Remender. I was a huge Strange Girl fan. That was something I read early on in my comics journey. I think you recommended to me.
That sounds very likely.
And I adored it. And I think if Paul Azaceta had been the artist on Strange Girl, I would have loved it even more. So yeah, there's a preview for you. We also looked at a couple of crappy, you don't get the whole comic previews.
Oh, I didn't look at any of those.
Okay, good. I looked at one and I was like, this is 3 pages. What am I supposed to do with this?
Did I send you one that was only 3 pages?
Yeah, I think one of them was.
I'd have to look. That might have just been something that was in a folder, but there's everything I sent you should have had.
Oh, maybe it was user error. But
that's okay.
Yeah, you don't read as many previews as
No.
Dal and Patrick do.
No, and for scheduling reasons, it doesn't work as well this time around.
Yeah, because we had to get this out a little bit early, but we wanted to keep the same kind of flavor.
Yeah, I was not going to let people know that this was recorded on any different schedule.
Right.
I was just going to let it...
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. Maybe
if you're an adult who likes Doctor Who, check out the seasons at FOCs after this originally comes out.
Yes. Yeah, I would recommend it too. But so we mentioned the lettering. You've done a little, besides being a retailer, your other foot in the comic industry is lettering.
Yes, I did do a little bit of lettering, mostly back in the late aughts, latter half of the aughts. A little bit for my buddy Jason Martin of Super Real Graphics, a little bit for my buddy Jim Heffron of Law Dog Comics, a little bit of Athena Voltaire, which is in the Athena Voltaire Compendium, available from somewhere. Dark Horse did the original print run. Steve bought it out. It's available through a different publisher now, but it's still the books that Dark Horse printed.
Yeah.
And speaking of Rick Remender, I did a couple backups in Fear Agent, which are collected in, I think, Volume 4 of the current softcover editions. And if you have one of the ginormous, oversized Fear Agent Volume 2s, I have a little bit of work in there. Well, that's the same work. A little book called The Long Count from Archaea, way back. Unfortunately, no issues came out beyond that, but it was a well-written, beautifully drawn book. There are actually a couple scripts available on Jason Blair's blog somewhere. Maybe search Comic Script Free Comic Book Day Jason Blair.
Is that the one that I found at Half Price Books at one time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, a little Megamind.
Oh, yeah.
From that company that we're not going to name.
So lettering, I think, is a little bit of an underappreciated comic art. Sometimes how I think, like, coloring... I mean, I'm sure Patrick and Dal appreciate colorists, and I definitely feel like I can tell the difference on good and bad coloring, but lettering is, I think, sometimes a little bit underappreciated. And it's a lot of work.
It is. I don't know that it's more work than any other part. But it definitely gets the shaft more frequently than other parts of the process when people decide they need to cut corners.
Sure.
Which is a horrible way of saying it, but it's how I'm phrasing it. And
yeah, because you need to get all the words on the page. You need to support the art. You need to make sure you're not detracting from the art. And get all the words in.
Yeah, sometimes you have like 10 words worth of space in a panel and you have 30 words to put in there. So you have to figure out what can move to different panels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shout out to all the letterers listening. We appreciate you. And all the colorists as well. Because coloring is, I think, a big deal. I just remember us seeing the art on somebody's book after the book had come out, and I looked at the original art and I'm like, oh my god, this is gorgeous. This got ruined in coloring. But we won't say anything.
I don't remember what that was, but
I'll tell you after the podcast.
I'm sure as soon as you tell me, I'll be like, oh yeah, that.
Yeah, I'll tell you afterwards. I feel like maybe Patrick and Dal would write it down, but I've already scribbled on this page so much I don't have a ton of room to write on it. All right, what else did we want to get covered?
Oh, we were going to talk about unified communications through all channels, or whatever that catchphrase is. I don't know how accurate this information is that I received today, but I was told that there's no more Thursday street dates from Lunar, which is intriguing because DC graphic novels were maintaining Tuesday street dates. So whoever told me stuff was misinformed.
So the single issues, they moved to Wednesdays.
That's been since the week of July 4th.
Right.
Yeah.
But they still were doing...
Yes. Because unified communications through all channels.
Yeah. They're doing a bang up job of unifying the communications across all channels.
I mean, there's communications through numerous channels.
Yeah, there are.
I don't know how often they mention unity.
Yeah. I don't know how similar the messages are to be unified.
Yeah.
Do you think, so Patrick and Dal talk a lot about, how much harder their work is now because of all these distributors. Is there any little part of you that blames DC? Like, that was the first domino to fall. Do you think if they hadn't split off, you'd all still be using Diamond?
I would say very likely yes. As in, if DC had not left, Marvel would not have been as quick to leave. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that blame is the right word for it. The precipitous cause. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think back to sometime, to before that when, friends of mine in who are retailers would, complain about Diamond and, Now it's kind of like you look back on those days like, yeah, but at least it was all coming in one, and
there are very, very many valid complaints about Diamond.
For sure.
There are things that Diamond definitely did, though, that made it easier for retailers when it came to stupid publisher decisions or lack of organization on the publisher's part.
Can you think of anything else that, like, because you've been a retailer for a couple decades now. Can you think of things that are easier now than they were before, or vice versa? Like things that were so easy in the beginning that are hard now?
I don't think so. So I remember when FOCs became a thing, and that was amazing. I remember when we got a point of sale in 2006, so we could track actual sales as best as you can when stuff happens. I remember when coworkers lost track of Star Wars #1 when it got up to about 50 variant covers.
Too many variants.
Like, I remember DC going to day early delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some ways, over nearly 20 years of course, I don't remember Diamond buying Capital, but in the grand scheme of things, it was only 5 years before I started in retail. And I do vaguely recall hearing about the purchase, which it was hard not to with Capital being based out of Madison also. But a lot of it, I remember a lot of the things that Diamond implemented that made things easier on retailers.
Nice.
I also remember stupid shit too. I don't even remember what the question was.
It was about like what's changed since the beginning of your retailer career to now. Like what's easier and what's harder than when you first started out.
Personally, I find it easier not to order stuff.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like, as time goes on, it's easier for me to go, if I'm like, should I order this? Should I not order it? It's easier for me to say no.
Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, so if you're a retailer and you are new, more if you're new than if you're old, because if you're old, you probably already know this, but yeah. Don't order everything. Don't feel like you have to order everything, you know. It's calculated choices, and one of my philosophies is sort of related to that. If a customer misses the first issue, that's kind of on me. If they miss the second issue, that's mostly on them. Because we're already taking a chance on the first one. Then we can read it and make a judgment. And yeah, if it's one of those things where we're like, we don't think this will sell well, if you thought it would sell to you, you need to be on that a little more.
Yeah.
Related, I remember when hardly no one, when there was very few people using the internet just to even realize what books were coming out.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas I've always sort of had that FOMO, because very early on there was an issue of Captain America that I missed. I want to say it was 379, first of a 3-part Serpent Society story. And especially, small town, there wasn't back issues.
Right.
I don't believe Westfield was open yet. There was a place in Madison that had back issues, but I don't even know if I knew about them yet. So as a kid, I was just like, I can't get it. So as soon as I was an adult and buying my own books, I was like, oh, I don't have to miss out? Why would I want to?
Right.
Sort of like when DVRing became a thing and you couldn't get shows on demand, my thought is, if you know you want a show, why would you not DVR it?
Right. Even if you think you might want the show.
Yeah.
DVR.
Which admittedly is a little different because the pricing's a little different.
Sure,
but
sure.
If you knew you want to watch that show, why would you not DVR it?
Right. Yeah, getting the pull list was a big game changer for me. and not having that angst of missing any books or anything. Let's talk quick about, like, go ahead.
I remember you asking me, what piece of advice would I give to a shopper?
I was just going to go there.
To help a retailer.
Yeah.
But my question is, what do you think my answer is going to be?
So I don't know what your answer is going to be, but I know what I would advise. And I'm a bad shopper, but I would advise you ask for stuff after it's available to be ordered, but before FOC. Like, sometimes, creators will start talking about books, and we'll all get excited about it, and we'll all want our retailers to put us down for it. But if there's nowhere for them to put us down for it yet, it's a pain for them. And I've been guilty of that sometimes with you too.
I remember when Jeff Smith's Shazam miniseries was announced, and I think they even said at San Diego that it was like, oh, we just agreed to this morning.
Right.
People were already telling us, oh, I want to get that. It's like, you realize this isn't going to be out for like 2 years, right?
Right.
Jeff Smith has never really been known as a guy who's drawing fast, and when something was 4 48-page issues...
But get in before FOCs. Don't be like me and be hearing challengers talk about a book on the podcast and then asking you for it.
Related to that, I would say, if you ever see a press release or some kind of announcement, bookmark it.
Yeah.
Because the number of people that'll come in and go, oh, I saw something about X or Y or Z.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I can't find anything. Do you have an ad, a press release? Do you have the issue of whatever you saw it in? And the number of times that people say yes is far, far smaller than it should be.
Yeah.
At the very least, they can also, then, we can read it and go, oh, this was just announced. It's not going to be out for 6 months.
Right.
Because a fair amount of times people also don't read that far. And I'm not saying you have to read that far, but if you find that and give it to your retailer, they can read it for you and politely tell you it's going to be a while.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have insight into the industry and the way those things come out that not everybody's going to.
Yeah.
Pick up your polls.
Or actually, this week I had someone send a list of their special orders, which did not include item codes, which made me a little sad because I could have sworn it had been discussed before. The title was not the title of the book. Ooh. I could not find the title. Thankfully, based on where it was with other special orders, I could flip through previews, and I did find the title. It's a title with a logo that has, like, shapes in it that aren't letters, so it leads to possible confusion. And I also, back to what my answer to the question is, I thought with myself about it, because I'm like, do I do something super broad that covers a whole bunch of things, or do I just go do this? Because one of the things I thought was going to be, and it may still be the answer, is be timely.
Yes.
Which is broad, but it covers, and obviously there are different stores with different procedures, but I'm going to wait until the next time I go into a store to tell you I want to drop X, Y, or Z title. And
you've already ordered it. That was going to be next on my list too, is when you want to drop something, get the next one that was ordered for you,
Well, except, especially this time of the year, it might be 3 issues.
Yeah.
Because there's at least 1 week here where we're FOCing 7 weeks before books ship. So if that book comes out every 3 weeks, like some Marvel books sometimes do,
Yeah. I try to, when I want to drop a book, I try to at least pick up the ones that are coming in for me and then drop it after that.
Yeah. But far too many people are just, I'm going to wait until the next time I go in. Well, if don't wait, just send an email.
Send an email or use the service that Challengers has.
But yeah, don't wait to tell or if there's if you have an issue, don't wait to bring up the issue.
Right.
It.
Don't linger in the store after close. Like if you want to shop at the store close to close, be mindful of the time and get up to the register before closing time. That's another piece of advice I would give.
Oh, see, in that case, I have no problem telling people they need to get in gear.
But to avoid having to be told, or to avoid being annoying somebody who's just being nice, you know, folks want to go home at the end of a long comic shift.
Sort of my other answer to your question was even more broad than the last one. Oh, because the timeliness was also pick stuff up timely, but it ties into communicate with your retailer. And that doesn't mean tell them something. It means like make sure you are providing feedback in what communication actually is, which is they give you a message, you reply to it.
Yep.
If they give you, you know...
Read what they've written to you, too.
Yes. Read what they've written in a timely manner.
Or listen to the voicemail they've left you.
Reply to it. Well, people should just listen to voicemails that they get before they...
Call back.
Whether or not it's a comic book store. That's just a life lesson. A free life lesson. Unless you're a patron, in which case that life lesson costs you probably about 13 cents of your monthly Patreon.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if they give you a recommendation and you try it, give them feedback on that.
Yeah.
Also, if they give you a recommendation and it's not a janky store, but we're kind of not talking about janky stores anyways because there's plenty to change about janky stores. They give you a recommendation and you like it, let them know. If you don't like it, let them know.
Yeah.
If they give you a recommendation, listen. Like
yeah, I found so many, like when I first started shopping at Westfield, and I found so many good books on your recommendation.
Yeah.
If you're seeking recommendations, give them something to work on. Tell them the kind of stuff you like. Tell them the stuff you've read before that you liked.
That's a whole other thing, though.
Yeah.
I was just thinking more in the sense of, in the communication loop, they're giving, you have to give back, where it's not actually communication. And
right.
You're what's holding that up.
Right. So communication, timeliness.
Yeah.
Can we slap a third one on there just to make it a nice even trio? And then there was silence.
These are all outside of pre-orders. See, I was just trying to have just one. If I knew I could have three, I would have thought all of them through way better.
I know. Pre-ordering is a big thing. Pre-ordering is a big thing you can do to help your retailer and your favorite comic creators.
Actually, here's a good third one. If your retailer isn't good, if you absolutely do not have to shop with them, don't.
Yeah.
Just don't.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
That's good. But always keep...
Also, though, you might be the problem.
Yeah, that's
keep that in mind, too. Fellow retailers, we are not always the problem.
That's 100% sure. All right, is there anything else you want to share before we sign off on this? Any comics you thought of that you love? Stuff coming up you're excited about?
I did get an email from Kelly Sue's automated thing double checking my contact info, so
nice.
I might be getting a card from her, maybe.
Nice.
Is what the internet told me.
Yeah.
When we did the intro, I was going to make a joke about voices for radio, but faces for television. I didn't get to do that one.
We were both getting over colds that we got at an indie wrestling show, so we both might be a little...
And maybe some allergies, too.
Yeah.
Or at least the start of allergies.
Yeah. I think we covered it all. So,
I'm good with that, then.
So I just want to say...
I don't know what I'm going to listen to on Monday, though, because
I don't think I can listen to myself either yet. So, yeah. Thanks for listening.
Keep reading comics.
Once again, huge thanks to Josh and Heidi for filling in for Dal and I this episode. So long as I make it back to the United States in one piece, I will be back next episode. Dal will be back next episode. We hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday if you celebrated. We hope you had a wonderful weekend either way. And we are about to approach the Christmas season. And in fact, by the time you hear the next episode, we will have already had a huge holiday season kickoff event at the store with the Here Initiative, with Dark Matter Coffee, with several creators. And that reminds me, I need to call Ryan Brown right now, so I'm going to go do that. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Heidi. Thanks for listening. Keep reading comics. Look, I know they already did that part, but I never get to say it, so there you go.
This has been Contest of Challengers. Thanks for listening. Keep reading comics. Challengers is located at 1845 Northwestern Avenue in the Bucktown neighborhood of Chicago. 773-278-0155. Keep up to date with new releases and events at challengerscomics.com. And help fund this podcast at patreon.com/challengers.